Donald Trump destroys liberal host Liv after shocking question about Melania. When a left-leaning TV host attempted to catch Donald Trump off guard with a shocking question about Melania, she had no idea it would become the biggest mistake of her career. What unfolded next wasn't just an interview. It was a masterclass in turning the tables. It was supposed to be a routine primetime interview, another opportunity for the media to challenge Trump with tough questions, hoping to get a reaction that would make headlines. The host, known for her aggressive interviewing style, had spent weeks preparing. Her research team had carefully crafted questions designed to corner Trump, to make him stumble, to create the viral moment that would dominate the news cycle. She sat across from him, confident, smiling just enough to disguise the trap she was about to set. Millions of viewers tuned in, eager to see what would happen next. But Trump wasn't just another guest, and this wasn't going to be just another interview. From the moment the cameras started rolling, it was clear that he was in control. He had faced the media's tactics countless times before, and he wasn't about to fall for them now. What started as a simple question about success quickly escalated into a heated exchange that no one, especially the host, was prepared for. Within minutes, the power dynamic shifted, leaving the host scrambling to keep up as Trump systematically dismantled her arguments, one by one. By the time it was over, the interview had become one of the most talked-about moments on television. The audience witnessed not just a battle of words, but a lesson in handling pressure, standing firm, and exposing the true nature of media bias. And it all started with one simple question. Before we dive in, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. It was primetime television, with millions of viewers watching live. The stage was set, the cameras were rolling, and the anticipation in the air was undeniable. People across the country had tuned in, expecting yet another tense exchange between a liberal journalist and Donald Trump. But what they didn't know was that they were about to witness something far more intense than just another political debate. The host, a well-known journalist with a reputation for putting conservative figures on the spot, sat confidently in her chair. She had built her career on challenging powerful guests, catching them off guard, and crafting viral moments that would fuel the news cycle for days. Tonight, she believed she had the perfect opportunity. Her team had worked tirelessly, analyzing Trump's past interviews, identifying weak points, and constructing a series of questions designed to humiliate him. She was convinced that this would be the interview people would remember, the one where she finally managed to shake his confidence. Trump, however, had other plans. As he entered the studio, he was the picture of composure. Calm, steady, and completely unfazed. He had been in these situations before, facing journalists who wanted nothing more than to trap him with loaded questions. But he knew their game. He had seen their tactics, heard their so-called gotcha questions, and watched them try and fail to control the narrative. He took his seat, adjusted his tie, and waited. He wasn't nervous. He wasn't worried. He was ready. The host greeted him with a practiced smile, one that masked her true intentions. The audience watched closely, sensing the tension before a single word was spoken. She leaned forward, her voice smooth, her tone measured. The first question was coming, and it seemed harmless, at least on the surface. But Trump had been here too many times before to fall for the illusion. He knew exactly what was happening. What happened next would be nothing short of a complete reversal of power. The host thought she was in control. The host maintained her polished smile, the kind that masked intention with a veil of politeness. She had spent weeks preparing for this moment, and now, with the cameras rolling and millions watching, she was ready to deliver the first strike. She leaned forward slightly, making sure to keep her tone light and conversational, as if she were merely curious and not laying the groundwork for an attack. Mr. Trump, you've built an empire, led a nation, and influenced millions. Would you say your success is simply luck? For a brief second, there was silence. The kind that makes people lean in, waiting for what comes next. Trump didn't react immediately. Instead, he studied her, as if measuring not just the question but the motive behind it. Then, with the slightest tilt of his head, he responded, his voice calm but deliberate. That's an interesting word, luck. Liberals love to use it to diminish hard work. But let me tell you what luck doesn't do. The host's smile flickered, just for a moment. She had expected him to brush off the question, maybe even take it lightly, but instead, he had turned it back on her before she could push further. Trump continued, his tone steady, unshaken. Luck doesn't construct skyscrapers. Luck doesn't create jobs. Luck doesn't make America great. You see, when people don't understand success, they like to call it luck. It makes it easier for them to ignore the years of effort, the risks, the sacrifices. But let's be clear. Nothing I've built, nothing I've achieved, came from luck. The audience listened in silence, some nodding in agreement. The host, however, wasn't ready to back down just yet. She straightened in her seat, determined to regain control of the exchange. So you're claiming that everything you've accomplished is solely the result of hard work? Trump didn't miss a beat. I'm saying success belongs to those who earn it. Yes, I've been fortunate, but I've also worked harder than most people can imagine. There were nights without sleep, deals that felt impossible, obstacles that would have stopped many others. But here's what truly matters. I never did it alone. The host's eyebrows lifted slightly, sensing an opportunity. This was the moment she had been waiting for. She thought she had found an opening, a way to shift the conversation in a direction that would expose weakness. She leaned in just a little, her voice laced with curiosity, though her intent was clear. "Not alone?" she asked, tilting her head. "Let's talk about that. Let's discuss the people behind Donald Trump." She was walking straight into a discussion that would reveal far more than she had ever intended. The host saw her chance and took it. She had failed to trap Trump with the idea of luck. So now she shifted gears, steering the conversation towards something more personal. With a smirk and a slight tilt of her head, she delivered the question she had been waiting to ask. "Well, Mr. Trump, since we're talking about success, let's discuss the woman behind you, Melania. Many say she's unusually reserved for the wife of such a powerful man. Is she just a quiet observer, or something more?" The air in the studio seemed to change. The way Trump's expression hardened, the way he leaned forward just slightly, it was clear that this wasn't just another question to him. His eyes narrowed, sharp and calculating. "Quiet or dignified," he said, his voice measured but firm. "There's a difference. But I understand why some in the media struggle with that concept." A slight murmur rippled through the audience. They could feel the tension rising, the shift in energy. The host, however, maintained her polished smile, acting as if she hadn't just poked the bear. She was waiting for him to elaborate, hoping he would stumble or give her something to twist. But instead, Trump straightened in his chair, his voice growing stronger. "Melania isn't just by my side. She's my partner. She's intelligent, accomplished, and deliberate in choosing when to speak. Unlike some people who feel the need to fill every silence with meaningless chatter." A low chuckle spread through the room. Some audience members exchanged knowing glances, while others smiled at the unexpected jab. The host's expression faltered, just for a second, before she quickly regained her composure. She had expected Trump to brush off the question, maybe give a vague, rehearsed answer. But instead, he had flipped it back on her, forcing her to rethink her approach. She wasn't used to guests pushing back so confidently, and now she was starting to realize that this wasn't going to be an easy win. Still, she wasn't ready to back down. She adjusted in her seat, preparing to press further. "Well," she said, keeping her tone light but pointed, "what I mean is, we rarely hear from her. Unlike other political wives who are far more visible. Don't you think the public has the right to know more about the woman standing beside Donald Trump?" Trump's expression didn't waver. If anything, he looked amused. He knew exactly where she was going with this, and he was more than ready to shut it down. What happened next would turn the interview into something no one would forget. The host wasn't done yet. She could feel the control of the interview slipping through her fingers, but she refused to back down. If anything, she leaned in further, her expression one of calculated concern, though the sharpness in her voice betrayed her intent. "But wouldn't you agree that being married to you has given her certain advantages?" Trump didn't react right away. Instead, he studied her, letting the weight of the question settle in the air. Then, with deliberate ease, he leaned forward, his voice cutting through the room like a blade. "You mean how people like you perceive her?" He paused for just a second, letting the words sink in. "Let me tell you something about success. Real success isn't handed to you. It's earned. And Melania? She earns her respect every single day." The host's confident smile faltered just a little, but she recovered quickly. She wasn't going to let him take control that easily. She adjusted her posture, acting as if she still held the upper hand. "Some would argue," she said, her voice laced with feigned curiosity, "that her greatest achievement is simply being Mrs. Trump." The energy in the room shifted. The audience murmured, sensing the weight of what had just been said. Trump's expression hardened, his usual ease replaced with something far more serious. He had tolerated the jabs before, but this was different. "Let's get something straight," he said, his tone firm, unshakable. "Melania speaks 5 languages. She built her own career. She has represented this country with more grace and dignity than most politicians ever could." He paused, eyes locked onto the host, his voice unwavering. "But you wouldn't know that, would you? Because the media is too busy pushing its own narrative." A wave of applause erupted from the audience, some even nodding in agreement. The host shifted uncomfortably in her seat. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. She had expected Trump to stumble, to deflect, maybe even lose his temper. But instead, he had flipped the entire conversation on its head, exposing the very bias she had hoped to use against him. For the first time, it was clear she had underestimated him. He wasn't just answering her questions. He was dismantling them, turning every attack into a moment of strength. And now, as the applause continued, she realized that whatever plan she had walked into this interview with was no longer in her control. Still, she wasn't ready to admit defeat. She straightened her shoulders, preparing to push just a little further, but what she didn't realize was that she had already crossed the line. And what happened next would be the moment that ended the debate for good. The host could feel the pressure mounting, but instead of stepping back, she made the biggest mistake of her career. She leaned in slightly, a smug expression crossing her face as she decided to abandon all pretense of professionalism. This was her last shot at rattling him, at getting the reaction she had been chasing all night. "Mr. Trump, let's be real. You're a wealthy, powerful man. Have you ever considered upgrading?" For a split second, there was nothing but silence. The kind of silence that makes time stand still, that makes people hold their breath because they know they've just witnessed a moment that cannot be undone. The energy in the studio shifted from tense to outright uncomfortable. Even the audience, who had been murmuring and reacting throughout the exchange, sat frozen. A few exchanged glances. The cameramen, usually trained to focus on their work, hesitated for just a moment, sensing the weight of what had just been said. Trump didn't respond immediately. Instead, he let the moment stretch, his gaze locking onto the host with an intensity that made her shift ever so slightly in her seat. Then, in a voice dangerously quiet, he spoke. "Upgrading?" He repeated the word slowly, as if tasting it, as if letting its full meaning settle over the room. Then, he leaned forward just slightly, his tone sharp and unwavering. "Let me explain something about value. Real value. In business, you trade up. In life, you cherish the people who stand by you when the cameras stop rolling." The host's smirk faded instantly. Trump didn't stop there. His voice, though calm, carried a weight that filled every corner of the studio. "Real value is loyalty, integrity, character, things you clearly don't understand." A collective gasp rippled through the audience. Some people blinked in disbelief, while others shook their heads, stunned that she had even dared to ask such a question. The cameramen exchanged quick glances, realizing they had just captured a moment that would be replayed over and over again. The host, for the first time that night, looked truly uncertain. She had pushed too far, and she knew it. But it was too late. The damage was done, and the power in the room had shifted completely. What happened next would cement this interview as one of the most unforgettable moments in television history. The host's confidence had vanished. The smugness in her expression was replaced with something else, panic. She could feel the weight of her own words crushing down on her as the silence in the room stretched on. Realizing she had made a terrible mistake, she tried to backpedal, her voice faltering as she scrambled to regain control. "I didn't mean." Trump didn't let her finish. He had heard enough. He leaned forward, cutting her off before she could twist her way out of accountability. "Oh, but you did," he said firmly, his voice carrying the unmistakable tone of finality. "And that's why America doesn't trust the media anymore." The words hit like a hammer. The host flinched ever so slightly, knowing she had walked right into a disaster of her own making. Trump didn't let up. "You wanted a gotcha moment?" he continued, his gaze locked onto hers. "Instead, you just showed the world exactly why people are sick of your brand of journalism." The room erupted. Applause filled the studio as the audience rose to their feet, some clapping, others shaking their heads in disbelief at what they had just witnessed. The energy had completely shifted. This was no longer an interview. It was a reckoning. Even the crew members, the people trained to remain neutral behind the cameras, couldn't hide their reactions. The host sat frozen, her carefully constructed narrative crumbling around her. She had set out to humiliate Trump, but in the end, it was she who had been exposed. And as the applause continued, she knew there was nothing she could do to change that now. Trump let the applause settle before he turned his gaze away from the host and looked directly into the camera. His expression was steady, his voice unwavering. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about something bigger. To every couple who has built something real together, to everyone who knows that commitment is worth more than a headline, this one's for you. His words carried a weight that couldn't be ignored. Because in the end, real relationships aren't about seeking something better. They're about standing together through it all. The room was silent now, except for the quiet hum of the cameras still recording. The host, who had spent the entire interview trying to trap him, now sat motionless. Her usual quick comebacks, her practiced smirk, gone. She had nothing left to say. And before she could even attempt to recover, the screen abruptly cut to commercial. The impact of what had just happened didn't take long to spread. Within minutes, clips of the exchange flooded the internet. Social media exploded with reactions, debates, and praise. Headlines didn't focus on Trump being caught off guard. They focused on how he had taken control and left his opponent speechless. This interview would go down as one of the most unforgettable moments in television history. But one thing was clear. Trump had once again flipped the script. If you loved this, hit like and subscribe. And tell us in the comments, what do you think about how Trump handled this?